Hello and welcome back. A lot of you guys have requested a tutorial for how to start a game of EU5 and showing every single step and explaining our thought process throughout. That is what this video is going to be, where we are going to be kind of deep diving, showing off a start where we show everything as the Mamluks here. And specifically talking about ideas in general, so that it applies more broadly towards all starts. I think that this is going to be a bit of a beginner and intermediate / video, where it's going to be beginner for someone who has no idea what they're doing, and also intermediate because we're going to be talking about some kind of bigger picture ideas and more strategic considerations as we go through. I'm planning on making a shorter version of this, where we try and keep it under 10 minutes and just focus on the main ideas, kind of more of a checklist type of thing. But with that said, the first thing we do on our nation when we are picking a nation is we look at all the country bonuses, and we are going to be looking for, okay, anything that is juicy that we maybe would really like discipline, this type of thing. This would be when we're kind of picking a nation, we're looking for something, but also once we've decided on a nation, we are going to be looking for things that are going to maybe warp the way that we play. And an example of this for the Mamluks don't have a huge, really good example for this, but an example might be that we have Red Sea trade early on, so we're going to have a lot of trade range. Geographically, which we'll get to, we also are in a really good position to trade. So with this, we can actually range India. So we might want to invest more in trade early on. And also we have this tech, Masters of the Nile. Generally speaking, on most runs, getting your prosperity to cap is really important. And so having 0.2 prosperity trend is going to be something that you want. And usually you have to give something up to get this, whether it is going free subjects when you don't necessarily want to, using decentralized bureaucracy instead of centralized bureaucracy just for the prosperity. We are Muslim, so we're going to have Iqta law, and so we could go the option that gives us a tax efficiency malus instead of the one that gives us a bonus in order to get this prosperity. All these types of things are things we might sacrifice, and so when we start talking about values, something that we could do as Egypt a little bit easier is to push serfdom, because we don't care about getting the prosperity from free subjects as much. And so this opens up a different gameplay pattern, and knowing this ahead of time means that we could plan around it and try and lock in serfdom or go serfdom, knowing that we are going to have this as a thing to kind of free up our prosperity slot. But with that said, another example of this might be Castile, where we have the Crown of Castile government reform, where it is going to give progress towards aristocracy. So any plan you have or gameplay pattern you like for maybe pushing plutocracy, it's going to be harder to execute as Castile because you're locked in on this government reform. So this is an example. I think France has a ton of content that pushes them towards aristocracy, for example, as well as serfdom. And so these are some things that just kind of are good to know as you've become a little bit more experienced in the game. But we are going to be playing the Mamluks. Now, I don't repeat myself, so listen very, very, very carefully, because I never repeat myself. When we click this, and this is very important, you want to cover your eyes. That way you don't get hit by the flashbang. And then we are in-game here as Egypt. So, strategically, I like to think of the game as operating in 3 layers. At its most basic layer, we have locations, which is where a lot of the magic happens. Buildings give you money, they give you manpower, they are operated by pops, who are going to have different professions, different religions, cultures, etc. This is at its most, kind of down-to-earth, basic level. And then kind of halfway in between that, we have maybe, regional geography and kind of what's going on in your nation. And then kind of above that, we have these type of relationship regional things like control and market access. And then even above that, we have kind of things that will affect our entire nation, which are going to be our estate privileges, laws, our values, these types of things. And so when we enter in a game, generally speaking, we're trying to figure out where we are with all these things, how our strategy is going to be informed by our particular position, and how our strategy is going to be informed very in particular by our geography / resources. And so going through these initially is usually what I like to do in a game, and just kind of to put ourselves into the frame of mind of what we might be looking for is Do we have a situation where we want to push land value, right, where we are going to be primarily gaining proximity through land, this type of thing, or do we have a lot of oceans around us where we're going to want to push naval, something like this? Do we have a lot of really good RGOs, in which case we might want to go/stay traditional economy early on, or do we want to go straight for capital economy? These are the types of questions that, looking at our geography in a little bit more of a kind of close way, is going to help to answer, and so we're going to do that here as Egypt. Okay, so we're going to be going through a bunch of different map modes, and for this, I would just generally recommend assigning hotkeys to allow you to transition through these faster. I do have my hotkey mapping pinned in my Discord if you wanted to use what I have, and I do have a video that goes into greater detail talking about the different map modes. So if, for example, you wanted to oscillate between looking at a resource of an area and looking at if it's a farmland or not to know which is the best place for producing food, you can do it by just moving back and forth, whereas using kind of this stuff down here will be a little bit more difficult. But with that said, there's going to be kind of 3 different types of map modes we're looking at in terms of important information. Stuff that's easy to change, stuff that's hard to change, and stuff that's impossible to change. The most important thing is the easiest stuff to change, which is going to be the control, which is going to be throttling how much tax base you are generating, and also how big a military you can get in terms of the amount of manpower and levy size you are going to be having. So this is very, very important, but it's easy to change because your biggest source of it is going to be the capital, and you can move your capital, right? Similarly, you can move market centers, and market access is going to throttle how much economy you have, just kind of generally speaking. And so these are things you can move. Difficult to move is pop, and this is an extremely important factor. Generally, you want to build around pop, and you also, to a lesser extent, want to build around development. These are things that are hard to move, so all other things equal, you can move your capital, you can move markets around these 2 things. And then finally, stuff that's impossible to move is, well, RGOs you technically can move once you get the event in the late game, but generally speaking, you kind of can't move RGOs, you can't move your topography, you can't move your vegetation, you can't move where locations are relative to each other, you can't move what is in the province. These types of things are stuff you cannot change, and so these, to another extent, we can't play around these. We can get development to change in some areas, and we can move pops around to some extent, but we can't change these other things. Something worth noting is you can also create a market, and this is useful in some cases if you're just in the middle of multiple markets. And so we're going to be keeping these things in mind as we kind of go through these various things. We're not going to go into incredible depth, we're just going to broad strokes it, just to kind of illustrate the ideas here. And so let's look at population. We see we have a bunch in the Delta, we have a bunch along the Nile as well, and then we have a big chunk over here, but we're going to, generally speaking, want to play through our high pop center, especially knowing that control propagates outward from locations. Having a big clump of high pop is going to be something we want to play towards. Let's check development as well. We see good development here. Kind of some good stuff over here. We see Damascus has 31 development, and also decent development along the Nile for us here. And so we have good, strong development. Resources, we have, generally speaking, pretty solid resources. They're not too crazy. We do have a gold pile over here. We have some kind of semi-premiums in the cotton and the sugar here. We're not going to go into full depth. We just have kind of medium-ish resources here, some good ones over here, a little bit of gold here, but the gold there's like no pops there. And so it's not the case that we want to just get up and move everything over to kind of this Hijaz region. But also something worth noting is these plus signs. They mean you have a location modifier. Something worth noting / checking out. And we have a ton of this in the Nile, so all other things equal, we would want to play towards the resources as well. Let's also now check our terrain. And generally speaking, you are going to want a combination of flat land and also grassland and farmland together. The reason why is flatland has no modifiers. Every single other topography type is going to have significant malices to both development growth and proximity, and so you want to have big clearings of not having these negative modifiers, and it's going to be a similar story with vegetation, where woodlands, forests, these types of things will have penalties to proximity impact as well as development growth. And so farmland in particular does have a proximity impact malus, but it also has a development bonus, and so generally speaking, it's a net positive. And so we, just taking a look at this stuff, are going to see, okay, we have some flatlands. Not ideal that we have kind of the wetlands here, but at least it's on the outskirts rather than just like right on top of the capital. We see I have flatland down there, a little bit of rough terrain in Syria, a little bit of rough vegetation in Syria. Desert in particular is going to have a very, very low population capacity. So no matter what we do, we won't be able to get a lot of pops there. Farmland, on the other hand, will have the highest pop capacity. And so taking a look at this, we can see we are starting to get the bigger picture that, okay, we are going to be playing around the Nile Delta. We also have climate, which you don't really necessarily need to consult that much, but we're going to take a little bit of a look at it here. And so we can kind of get to the point where we're thinking, okay, we're probably going to want to have the capital, somewhere in this delta, and also a market capital somewhere in this delta. Currently, we have the capital in Cairo here. Now, here's the thing. This is a knowledge check. We know that we're going to get a ton of events that put unique buildings in Cairo, and these buildings will only be active if we have the capital in Cairo. So knowing this, we're actually not going to move the capital off of Cairo, but Cairo would actually be a very good place for a capital. And one of the reasons for this is the way rivers work. Rivers, if we take a look at the proximity map mode, push proximity downstream really well. They give you the equivalent of a modern road when pushing proximity downstream. So we are actually going to have really high control downstream from Cairo, and Cairo is kind of at the mouth or the foot of the delta, not sure which, but it is going to push control out pretty well to the rest of the delta, so having it at the top of the delta is nice. And also, to my knowledge, they've changed this from the pre-release build where you could actually get a road through, and so getting a road to here, geographically speaking, is going to be nice, because then we can push control into the Red Sea. So that's going to be nice on that front, and the reverse is true for pushing upstream in terms of market access, where you are going to get a bigger modifier for pushing your market access upstream, and so having it in Alexandria makes sense as well. And so we don't necessarily want to move anything, although it's possible that maybe over here is a little bit better than Alexandria. Alexandria notably is going to be on the Mediterranean, so it has a bigger pop cap, so I do think Alexandria is just fine, speaking specifically to the Mamluks. But more broadly speaking, let's get a couple examples of people who are going to want to move their capital real quick, or an example of someone who wants to move their capital real quick, and maybe why. We, as the Mamluks, we have a ton of ocean around us. We're going to want to go naval, okay? And so this is kind of just looking at what's going on geographically. We are going to be able to get much better control to the Levant going through the sea than we will going through these hills and woods. Okay, and a similar little bit of a story is true for Castile, where they are going to have roughish terrain, rough vegetation, and they start with the capital up here. And I think long term, they probably want to move it to Sevilla, but that's more of a long-term idea because they have a lot of pops up here. So that is an example. Another example of markets is going to be Austria. Austria starts out with their capital right here. They have only 65% market access. So every time they build a building, from an economic perspective, it's only going to be 2/3 of effective. As Austria, if you build a market capital here in Vienna, you will literally double the size of your economic base at game start. This is a very, very powerful thing you can do and should be on your radar if you are kind of in a little bit of a dead zone. Like maybe Brandenburg could consider making their own market capital. You could also look strategically to steal the market capital as well in terms of a plan. But we have one that is pretty close to our capital and is also going to be getting decent access up to our capital. And so overall, we're going to have good market access and control in this region, which has a lot of pop, has a lot of development, and has good terrain features and good RGOs. And so this, broadly speaking, is going to fit with our plan. And we know that we want to think of this here, the Nile Delta, as our power base, which is where we are going to focus on. I think maybe a little bit of extra emphasis should be placed on the river map mode. Also, just for starters, you can access this map mode only if you assign a hotkey to it. This isn't a joke. You can only access this if you assign a hotkey to it. It is not down here. This is not a drill. But this is going to be a feature that is going to be providing you with a really good both market access and also control. So if you're playing with the capital in Sevilla, it's worth noting that you will be able to push control up the river, even though pushing down river is a little bit better. You will be able to push this better, and so playing macro-wise around rivers is reasonable as well. But with that said, we're going to think of now kind of our geography in more of an extended sort of way with three things. Our diplomacy, our expands, and what our trade might look like, and what our trade centers might look like as a result of kind of some of this stuff. So we're going to say, pretend we're actually not scared of anyone, but if we were scared of the Ottomans, improving relations with them at Game Start would be valuable. They're one of our neighbors that's a little bit scary, and so I think that this is generally a good use of diplomats kind of early on. We see that we also have a few subjects. We might want to annex those subjects. We have to get positive relations with them, and so we'll want to do that. If we think that we might want to kill the slider, which we will, what we want to make sure we do have is that we're not somehow breaking ourselves from our monthly change. And so we're going to improve relations with a couple other people, just so that we won't have a positive kind of tick with the diplomats while we have our bar full. And we shouldn't have a positive tick now because it hasn't registered that we're improving relations. Oh, no, wait, we do have a positive tick still of 0.12. All right, so we'll improve relations with a couple other of our subjects, just looking to annex them. I think that should be good for now because it's not registering them all, and so that will work for us here. But we just want to spend down that resource. We also want to think a little bit about where we're going to expand. Unfortunately, Egypt doesn't really have good expands near its power base. We don't have anything too crazy, but we can be kind of in the back of our head thinking about maybe going for Makuria, annexing our subjects that we already have, maybe going for Tunis, because we will be, if we've decided that we are looking better for naval because we have a bunch of water around, we can project control to Tunis eventually. So maybe this is an expand, and this is an expand, something that we want to have in the back of our head. And also trade and markets. We know just kind of from experience, and also if we were paying really close attention in this map mode, that we'll have some wood in the Damascus market. Wood is going to be a problem in the Alexandria market, and so we might have to trade for it, this type of thing. And we're also thinking who we could trade with, who's nearby for polling institutions. We are near enough to Italy that regionally we don't have to be scared about getting institutions, and so this is something that you have to think about geographically because you import from other people for institutions. And generally speaking, Second Age, which is the most critical one, most of the institutions will spawn in Italy, and so we have a fine enough position there. We don't have to do anything too weird. If we were in Muscovy, for example, with the Moscova market, we would be far from Italy, and so we might have to be thinking of some weird strategies to get access to this type of thing. And also, let's say if we're playing as Castile, thinking about where we expand, we might want to improve relations with France and then expand into North Africa because it is going to be a little bit softer, or expand into our Iberian neighbors. Alright, so we've thought through kind of the locations layer, decided where we want to be focused on, where is going to be where we build up from, and now we are going to be going up a layer, and we're going to be focused on markets. Now, we know we want to be playing through the Delta at the start of the game, and while eventually we will be focused on 2 markets, at game start, just focus on the market your capital's in for most of the time, or for most starts this is going to be reasonable. And so something we want to check immediately is, are there a lot of other people in our market? If the answer is yes, then you don't necessarily want to collapse the construction good prices, because effectively it will be a higher cost for you because you're collapsing them for everyone else. As the Mamluks, we don't have to worry about this, but as Lubeck, we might not want to specifically try and collapse the price of input goods. And we will talk about this a little bit more when we get to our spend down, when we get to how we are going to spend all of our gold here at the start. But just coming through, what we are going to be focused on is we are going to check the input good, or we're going to check the supply source of 5 different goods, which are going to be lumber, masonry, sand, tools, and glass. Because for the very basic buildings, these are going to be the input goods, and ideally, we want to get the price of these low, because if the price of these are low, what we will be able to do is we will be able to build everything for a discounted price. You can see here, our price on lumber is high. We will not be able to build for a discount. And so part of our evaluation that we're doing here is, what do we have to do to try and collapse these prices? And also, is it even worth it? An example is for Venice, collapsing the price of lumber is not worth it. You have a bunch of other members in your market, and you have a bunch of burghers importing it. If we take a look at the Venetia market and we look at the lumber, there is 13 lumber being imported. So in order for them to get the price of lumber down, they'd have to produce like 15 lumber. But coming through, we're going to just briefly kind of look through that for Alexandria, and we have a lot of burghers importing, but we are almost the entire market. And it's not that huge a number. We're probably going to look to get the price of lumber down, and we can also import it. Masonry, if I recall correctly, we are going to be having a slight surplus of that. Maybe we build one mason, maybe two, something like this, just smooth out our overall experience. Notably with masonry, if you have an enormous masonry demand, it often is coming from your granaries. So you can also just, at game start, if that is an issue, you can just close your granaries and then look to open them later. Just don't forget to open them, because it is an important building. But we're going to go look through masonry. Sand is important for building roads. If you know you're going to be wanting to build roads early, this is an important one to check. We see that we have a surplus of sand, or we don't have any burghers importing. We can come over here and see that burghers are exporting a ton. Sand is going to be cheap for us. Surprise, surprise, we have a bunch of desert. So we don't have to worry about sand. And then tools, which is going to be important for some RGOs. We see that we have a deficit of it, so we will probably want to deal with this. And we can maybe even approach dealing with it now. And then we see that, yeah, we have a bunch of demand for it. And then glass, almost always, you will have a surplus of glass here. And so we will have, actually, just burghers importing it. So why don't we do part of our spend down here to resolve these issues to the extent that we want to resolve them, building a few buildings to ensure that our inputs are cheaper. Alright, so we're not going to play 100% precise here. We just want to kind of illustrate the ideas. Right now, we're going to build a glass because we don't have a source of it, and we're going to build it in Alexandria. We see here, what rule we're kind of breaking is, normally we would wait for the price of masonry to collapse first before building it, because we are only getting a 17% discount instead of 33% discount. So when we spend, we would actually probably just build the masonry, and then also the lumber, and then just wait. But we're going to look to spend all of our money just to be as instructive as possible, and we're going to want to build glass. Now, you will get the maximum amount of the good if you build it on top of the market capital, and you will also look to want to build it on top of your capital if you're looking to extract profit. We care about the amount of the good for collapsing the price more than the profit. It's usually a little bit more straightforward if the market capital and the capital are the same thing. And so we are going to want to build specifically in provinces that have input goods that are input goods for the building. And so if we take a look at the glass, we will see the input goods are going to be sand, lumber, which we don't have a lot of in RGOs, and tools, which aren't going to be produced by RGOs. So we want to build this in a place that has sand, and to a lesser extent, alum and lead if possible. But we know Alexandria has sand in the province that it is located. I believe there's some sand over here, and it is also right next to the market capital, so we are going to put one of these down. We only need one glass. You don't need a lot of glass. We know that our price of masonry is going down, but we would like it to go down more and be a little bit more stable. We want to build close to the market capital, and we want to build in a province that has either clay or stone per the production methods on the mason. So what we're going to do is we're going to build just 2 masons, and we're going to build them on top of the sugar and the cotton. Actually, we can do a little bit better. Let's build it on top of this here. And one of the reasons why we're building a little bit spread out like that is we care about our pop promotions. We're going to look to spread out our build a little bit because we are going to have to promote laborers to occupy these buildings. And I think we're more likely to actually end up expanding out our cotton than we are our fish. and so these will compete for laborers, and so we're going to build them a little bit over, but we are specifically looking for clay RGOs or stone RGOs. So that should be enough for the mason to be relatively stable and to keep the prices down. Actually, let's build another one just for good measure, but we're building them all in the province that has the clay in it. So that's that. Next up, we know that we want tools. Tools can be a little bit more profitable. We actually don't have a good location with any of these. I guess to some extent the stone we do have, but the stone production method is not very efficient. Well, it's not very efficient per building, and so iron would be definitely preferable, but lacking this, we are going to look to slap this down, and I think we're going to look to slap it down in the capital, or we're going to look to slap it down over here. Let's slap it down over here. The capital we will build purely for profit once we get there. We don't necessarily care that this is not adding to as much tax base, and so we're going to look to build a couple tools, because we did see that we were in a slight deficit on tools in our market, if I recall correctly. We could always just double check and see what's going on. It's more than a slight deficit, so maybe let's build a little bit more levels. We have slave markets, not a typical thing that you're going to have, and so we could use a little bit more of these. Let's actually just a little bit more, not a lot, a bit more. We also have a lot of these. Actually, a lot of these are not at full employment, so maybe we'll just do 1 and 1. I think that'll be fine. They're not at full employment, so them employing up should also help. And then also, just to be clear, we see this bar, which is how we know what their employment looks like, the capacity filled. So we know that we are down 6 lumber. And actually, unfortunately, we basically have no lumber RGOs in here, which is going to be a bit of an issue. So we want to put down 6 or so of these, which is going to be expensive, but we have a very big kind of bank at the start, and so what we're going to do is we're going to look to put them down in places that specifically don't have clay and stone and are close to the market capital is going to be ideal. And we don't, even though you want to have multiple levels for economies of scale, it's going to take a while for these pops to promote up, and so we're going to look to spread them out a little bit. We know that there's stone in here, there's clay in here, and we want to build close to the market capital so that it produces as much of it as possible. We can build one in the market capital, but then let's build on the other side here where we're not going to be competing with the masons. And so this will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That should be enough to get the lumber price coming down a little bit, but we can build another one. Another thing we can do is, and often this is a decent enough thing to do on starts, is we can sort by list. We can type in Carpenter Guild, and we can actually just close the Carpenter's Guild. These are going to eat lumber a lot early on, and so this should solve our input goods on our lumber, our masonry, our tools, and our glass. And then sand, we don't have to worry about. Sand being good for the roads, but sand is just going to be cheap for us. So that's kind of our input goods handled after we took a look. Notably, you're not going to want to always collapse the price of your input goods. Sometimes you just want to build the profitable stuff instead, but we are the only one in our market. We have a really big bank. We can afford to play in this way here. But as counterexample, Venice, you're just not going to early on want to try and collapse the price of lumber. It's just too much to eat through, and you're collapsing it for other people. Other people are going to use the lumber, and it's just not going to be worth the investment. And so this is what you look at to kind of decide if it's worth the investment, is going to be the goods there. But that is kind of our market layer to some extent handled for our input goods, for getting things done. Another important aspect of the market layer is going to be figuring out what there's a huge deficit of. You can sort by price and look at what's really expensive, but this actually is not fully informative of what is actually going to be really profitable at the start. But we actually do see right here, there's a huge, and this is the case for a lot of things, there's a huge deficit of fine cloth. Even though fine cloth is not yet expensive, fine cloth prices are going to spike super high as soon as we unpause. And so if we look at not the market price difference, what we're looking at is the goods balance. Stuff with a really negative goods balance, even if it's not expensive right now, it's going to almost immediately shoot up in price. And so when we get to spending a little bit more, we're going to want to build fine cloth, because we know it's going to be very profitable. And this profitability, predictor, where it's only 0.79, this is super lying to us. It's going to be like 5 or 6 per building. It just doesn't know it yet. All right, so next up we have the national level, where we have our states, what our cabinets are doing, what laws we have, what our values are. But the thing I like to do first here is first just look for any really bad estates, because that's going to inform what our strategy is, in addition to our geography, all the things we looked at, as well as our own content. But we have 3 bad ones. A bit unfortunate. And for each of these, starting with Banal Lordship minus max control and Pop's Join Rebel Threshold, both of these are nasty modifiers. They are really expensive to revoke, and this expense scales with the power of the estate you're revoking it from. So if the estate's really weak, it's actually cheap to revoke, but Banal Lordship is really bad and is definitely something we want to get off of. It is quite painful. We also have, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Waqf payments, which is going to give minus 10% tax efficiency. Really nasty modifier as well. Also expensive to revoke. And then finally, we are going to have one that is less expensive to revoke, which is going to be communal lands, giving us decentralization trend. So with these in mind, we are going to take a look at our values, and where we are going to want to push our values is going to depend on kind of both our geography, which we looked at, and also if we have a really nasty estate privilege, as well as our own content, unique content, and also what we think of in terms of where we think we're expanding. And so we'll go through these one at a time and just kind of talk about where we want to go. But in general, whatever direction you want to point, what you want to go, you want the arrow pointing in that direction, even if the number's not big. And an example of where this is not the case is serfdom-free subjects. If our arrow was even or pointing towards serfdom, we would be locked in place on our serfdom progress. It would stay at 30. But with this coming the other way, we will slowly trend towards 10 free subjects. And so if we like serfdom, we would not be locked in. And so specifically and especially with things that you have a really big already kind of movement towards, like let's say this 30 serfdom, let's call this big, we really don't want to backslide because it's difficult to push once you've already pushed all the way towards what your trend is. So it wouldn't be hard for us to go free subjects to 10, because we already have a trend towards 10, but anything beyond that would be hard. So part of what we're going to want to do is to lock it up. You lock it up. And so we want to go centralization because you always want to go centralization. We're okay. Long term, we want to go innovative, but we're okay with traditionalist right now because the stab investment cost is actually kind of nice because we're going to need a lot of stab to revoke those nasty privileges. Generally, you kind of ignore this more or less early on, but we'll actively look to kind of avoid getting too much innovative if we can. We see we have a massive trend towards spiritualist. This would make it easier for us to get off of wife payments if we moved off of spiritualist, because a spiritualist is giving us clerics, but I don't think it's necessarily that big a priority. What I do think is a big priority is maybe us getting off of aristocracy or getting aristocracy down low, because this is giving us a lot of additional nobles. And so this is one of the ways you can revoke a noble privilege that's nasty. And so this is going to be something that is in the back of our head, but we don't necessarily have to get a ton of plutocracy. We just have to try and get this thing like closer to 0, or don't even need a really the aristocracy trend to move towards plutocracy. If it gets really low, then we could use events and such to try and nudge it towards plutocracy, or towards 0 rather, more so than towards plutocracy. We probably actually want to go serfdom because we have good RGOs. Raw material output is pretty nice modifier, especially if you're expecting to have a lot of production efficiency anyways. And one of the things you get off of free subjects that's valuable for most nations is the monthly prosperity. Remember, we have that Nile River tech or advance in age 3, which is going to give us the prosperity, so we don't necessarily need it as much, and max tax would be very nice. But to just kind of highlight our idea here, when you have really big populations, you will have really high max building level. Max building level, or the building level you have, is a big source of production efficiency. And so this means our production buildings will be able to produce up really with a really high advantage. And while eventually I think you do want to go towards a more capital-oriented economy, because we can build our things so tall, we don't necessarily need to focus on it early on. And the raw materials output, we're not going to have RGO output bonuses as much. If you look at your economy in a balanced sort of perspective where you need the RGOs and then the RGOs are in the production buildings, we already have the bonuses on the production buildings by virtue of having enormous pops. So we are going to probably want to kind of move or stay in serfdom direction, especially because we can also tax the peasants more. And this is also useful when you have high pops. We're okay going towards conciliatory. We probably do want to move towards conciliatory. We would prefer to move towards quantity, but it's even, and so it's not trending in the bad direction. And we also don't have much progress. It's not a priority. Probably want to move towards offense, not a priority. We want to move towards naval. And currently we have a ton of land. And so we could either push this a lot initially or look to push it later. But honestly, getting a huge naval push early on isn't going to be too useful for us. We're going to be focused in here early on. We don't need to get a ton of control over to Damascus because we will have so many good opportunities here. We will have a lot of control here. We have a lot of locations that aren't built out here. And so we are going to stay focused over here rather than trying to push stuff over to Damascus. You can see the fruits of us having low control, by the way, as a result of banal lords and also local courts. Yuck. That is a law that we'll want to get off of. Very, very painful. And so that will be a thing. And then we will also want to move towards capital economy here, or as most runs rather, we would want to move towards capital economy. But remember, we already get a bunch of production efficiency. And so I think we're okay staying traditional economy for an extended period of time here as Egypt. And so we will get more RGO output, more population capacity, allowing our pops to grow better. And also, we actually start at pop capacity in some of our locations. After the Black Death, this isn't going to be an issue, but we're pretty close to cap in a lot of places, so that'll actually be nice, nice-ish, and food production is fine enough. We want to lock in our communalism, like real bad, because this gives you a revoked privilege cost discount, a big one, a meaty one. And so this is it at max scaling. Currently it's giving us 25%. So this 0.1, getting rid of this is going to be a priority towards us. And we're also trending towards jurisprudence. I think we want to push jurisprudence. But with this in mind, the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to look to just lock a couple things in that we don't want to backslide towards. We don't want to backslide towards free subjects, and we don't want to backslide towards individualism, specifically because we know we want this revoke cost discount. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into here. I do believe we have our progress towards communalism in here that is going to be reasonably good. We have a couple things that progress towards communalism. We're going to choose the one that gives us stab investment. And whenever you slot these in, you're going to be paying a cost. The cost is going to be in satisfaction of your estates, where generally speaking, it's a little bit more complicated, but generally speaking, the ones that get really unsatisfied are the ones that are powerful. It depends on how much they dislike it. And also, use is going to be a cost that we pay in legitimacy. We don't want to fall under 50 legitimacy because this is going to cause us to be able to roll disasters. So maximum, at this point, we want to give out 5 privileges. So we'll give out this one, which will give us progress towards communalism. And now, communalism is locked up. So the progress that we have is not going to backslide. Perfect. We will stay at 50, giving us minus 25% revoke privilege cost. There is a parliament that gives you a discount, but we would have a hard time pushing communalism. I don't think there's enough sources for us to really effectively push it. And the other thing we wanted to lock in was serfdom, and a good one for that is going to be the nobility-controlled serfdom. There aren't too many options for this. This is, I think, the only option we have available, other than what we could also do is go for agricultural cultivation. One downside of giving this out is it's going to make the nobles more powerful, which will make it harder for us to revoke, but 40% isn't a lot, and I actually just like this privilege, generally speaking, anyways, and so we'll slot that in, and we will have locked in our trend towards, or we will have locked in, away from our backslide, the progress we already have towards serfdom, which is going to give us, importantly, RGO output, and also maximum tax for peasants of state. That's going to be a huge source of our income, by the way, just to kind of show what we have going on tax-wise. They are giving us over, or like 3/4, a little bit less than 3/4 of our overall tax income just at this juncture. And so if you can afford to go serfdom with your unique content or your situation, generally it is pretty good, but often it does require a decent amount of investment. I did want to come back and touch on this really low control, because I do think that there's another diagnostic that we didn't really do when looking at the geography that's worth looking at, which we have really low control here. And part of the problem is this is just integrated. It's not cored. In order to have a territory cored, it must first be integrated, and then you must accept the culture there. We notice we also have one location that is going to be conquered. Generally speaking, I think that it's more worthwhile to expand via subjects, so we'll actually release that as a subject right now. So we'll create a subject, we will do a custom subject, we will select, is that just its own province? It is, so we will select this province and we will release them as a fiefdom. Okay, so they will integrate the location for us, and then we can annex them later. So that'll be fine enough. But coming back into this, we see that there is a bunch of stuff that is just integrated. So if we accept the culture there, this territory would be cored, and we would get a lot more control in this location. By a lot more, I mean a little bit more, because we would end up having 20 score instead of this 5, and so we'd actually have like 1 control instead of 0, which is not a lot, but this is something that we want to care about and we want to look at. And so what we're going to do is we are going to specifically go out of our way to accept Levantine, I think. This will cost us prestige, but these areas will turn from integrated into cored, where we will get additional control. Also, we will get only primary and accepted growth, which is kind of a nice modifier to be having as well. So we're going to accept Levantine, and we're going to accept either Syriac or Tolerate Hijazi. Tolerate Hijazi is maybe an interesting one. That will help more with satisfaction, and the satisfaction will help with prosperity. Let's just do Syriac, though. I'm not sure which one is correct. I just wanted to point out that this is something to look at, and it is going to be something that we look to address. And also, if you have anything that is conquered, considering releasing it as subject is a decent shout. Most starts, though, will start with everything cored, but we don't have that situation here in Egypt. Alright, so took another look at our sources that we could use for communalism. Didn't really find, was only able to find 3 estate privileges that we could do, and then with the cabinet action on top of that, we'd maybe be able to push it like another 5 or so, but nothing too crazy. So we're going to be satisfied with 50 for now. We will just choose events that push us towards that instead of individualism, and look to avoid any trend towards individualism. With kind of this said, in terms of what I think we could do towards the values, or what I think we should do, I think it's between pushing naval right now, but we won't really get much benefit out of it right now, or pushing centralization, which to be fair is going to become much easier after our first parliament, where we will look to get rid of both local courts and traditional distribution, probably prioritizing local courts, because -5 max control, pretty nasty. Traditional distribution is also pretty nasty. For our first parliament, we would want to go on to favor the ruler instead, and so this is how we would spend our first parliament, is trying to get as much support as possible to change these 2 laws. But I think we can get a positive trend towards centralization. We can afford to give out 3 more privileges, and so I think that's what we're going to try and do here. I think we're going to revoke this here, the communal lands, which is going to cost us the 13 stab, which isn't the end of the world. And then our estate will be very, very upset with us, and so we will look to give them something else. Common militias, I think, is just good in general. We'll just take a quick perusal. There's not something we need to lock in. I do like, generally speaking, getting the freedom of movement one, but we have to be careful not to give anything that gives trend towards free subjects, because then we would be moving away towards serfdom. But we'll go common militias, and we're doing that just to make the peasants a little more, or a little bit less upset, to try and avoid a revolution, although it's maybe not 100% necessary there. And so we can give out 2 more privileges. We are going to be giving out the building roads rights, which is going to give us trend towards centralization. And then we are going to be giving out, we could give either embellish great works of art, we are going to check the satisfaction of our guys, or we could give out one of these that is going to give monetary fiefs. seeing that we have relatively happy nobles, we're actually going to give out this one right now, which is going to give us trend towards centralization. Tolerance to true faith is a nice enough modifier, and now we are at 50. Once we get more legitimacy, which is going to be after we unpause, we will be slotting in monetary fiefs in terms of what we want, and then also the very powerful privilege that you should slot in on almost everyone, if you can early on, if you have like the legitimacy budget, is going to be treasury rights for that 10% tax efficiency, but we'll leave it on the table for now. Which brings us back to the values. We have a 0.1 trend towards decentralization, so we're not sliding back towards centralization yet, but we do want to start moving in that direction, and so we will use change societal values to move towards centralization, and now we will have a trend towards centralization, which we'll look to juice up by giving someone over to that cabinet, and also a couple other things, namely our first parliament. We will be swapping off the two things, giving us trend towards decentralization, in particular local courts. We will be moving on to Central Council, which will give us more trend to or towards centralization here. Generally, I want to skim over my laws as well. We're not going to go into every single law that we want to change here. Notably, we do start with lenient taxation, which is what we were talking about with the prosperity source when we were looking at our values. Eventually, we do want to move this towards probably tax farming, but land acquisition might even make sense for us with the extra RGO size and the trend towards centralization. But we want to let our prosperity max out first before we do that. Maxing out your prosperity is going to be something that is quite useful, as it gives a bunch of good things, and you can see we are getting a positive trend of 0.13, although kind of nasty on the satisfaction. That's because our peasant estate is really mad at us right now, but we don't see anything too crazy in here. We're going to look through here. We notice that we do get some special laws by virtue of being the Mamluks, something that is a little bit cool. We won't go into too great a detail. Discipline is nice, though. For maritime law, we probably want to change this, or no, wait, this is the one we want with the trade range. We are looking specifically at administrative system, and generally also a feudal system, I think, is going to be a good one. We're on peasant to state satisfaction equilibrium. We know we want to get off of this. Aristocratic court will be fine for now, but long term we do want to move on itinerant court. But it gives progress towards decentralization, so we don't want to do that until we've pushed centralization as much as possible. We are going to take a look through here. And this is one of the better kind of inflection points. We won't be able to change it right now, but this gives trend towards aristocracy, and burghers gives trends towards plutocracy. So if we want a positive plutocracy push, which we kind of do to disempower the nobles so we can deslot their privilege, this is one way of going about it, is swapping that. And distribution of power, often the number one for you to change, but for us it's going to be the number two. Favor the ruler is what we want, because getting crown power early is really important. Also, maximum tax for Sunni nations is interesting because it allows you to tax the dhimmi more. Often favor the wealthy, long term is better, but we care about getting, and we care about this a lot, our crown power above 25, which is kind of the next point we wanted to talk about here. So crown power will give you a very nasty malus to, probably most importantly, tax efficiency, but also a bunch of other stuff. And so getting crown power high is very important. Also, it is a hard determiner of how much trade income you get, and so our trades won't be too valuable until we get our crown power higher. And so getting this above 25 in particular in the early game is a huge priority for us, and so we are going to want to get some additional sources of it. Currently, as it stands, we have around 10% positive crown power. When you kind of add all these up, we're going to look to get these up, and we're going to look to get these up not just by changing our law, which we would do in our first parliament ideally, but also by utilizing crown power characters. For every crown power character, or For the entirety of your cabinet, you will get 25% additional power towards estates based on what estate they belong to, including the crown. And also, you will get 25% from all of your generals over all your armies, and 20% of all your navies, or all your admirals over all your navies. We see that we have 4 crown power characters, so we actually have enough to put 2 into our cabinet, and 2 into our navy, and 1 into our navy and 1 into our army. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to choose for this the guy with the highest diplo that is part of the crown, which is this gentleman here, because that will positively affect our ability to push centralization more. And so once we have this in, we're getting 0.6 towards centralization. We're also going to promote him to the head of cabinet. This is going to give us an additional 25% crown power. Okay, and then we will come in and we will put this guy in charge of, or let's assign our cabinet action. Generally, I do like early on strengthen government until you get kind of to a good position here. Ooh, I forgot that assigning gives us, what did we do that is? Was it 5 legitimacy to promote to head of cabinet? Yikes. Okay. We'll have to fade the disaster for a little bit of time. We'll just have to get lucky. But we're going to strengthen government here as well. Usually I like to strengthen government with a cabinet action or move stab positively. Both of these are pretty good. And so we will appoint this guy because he's the best at it. And then we will appoint someone in charge of the army. Let's take a look at our crown. I think that we actually might like our heir more than our guy, so we're gonna put our guy in charge of the army here. Putting the heir in the cabinet would also maybe make sense. And so when we take a look now back on this, it won't be updated because it'll just stay at 16% till we unpause. But we will be getting 25% from our cabinet, the combined 2 members, 25% from the person in charge of the army, and 25% from the person in charge of the crown. So instead of being at 110% now, we are at 185% in terms of our total crown power modifier, including the baseline 100%. So this is probably more than enough to bring us over 25%. So this is a key kind of point. Also, we are saving this government reform slot for next age. It doesn't appear in the UI here, which is a little bit sad, but next age there is going to be a privilege that will give 10% crown power and will also give progress towards centralization, kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And so we will be doing that. Of course, the best one was the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. That killed like millions of birds with 1 stone. Alright, next up is the budget, and this is one of the reasons why I chose the Mamluks. So, generally speaking, I think if you're a monarchy, it's worth just maxing out the cost of court slider, especially if you're not a GP. GP will make it more expensive. We are a GP. We do have to pay 21% instead of the baseline 11%, so that is going to be painful. And now you see we're losing 34 ducats. That is uncomfortable, and we see... Let's take a look at the expense side of things first. We see a massive expense on the buildings and a pretty big expense on the forts. I think for almost every country, we can do this at first, and also we see a really big expense on the army. I think for almost every country, you want to delete every single fort except for the one in the capital. We can be the target of a crusade, so maybe we want to keep a little bit more, but I think it's reasonable to delete every single fort, and so we're going to delete every single one except for the one in Alexandria here. Let's kind of get rid of our market filters so that we can see all the markets a little bit easier. In particular, we have really easy defensible fort positions in a lot of spots, so it feels bad deleting these. Like this fort is just insane because it completely covers this like through area here, and there's other forts that are just like, we have so many choke points, but we're just going to delete all the forts except for the one in Alexandria and the one in the capital, because it's really, really important to resolve the budget early on, and then you can add the forts back in later. Also, if we get decked on a crusade, we can just plop down a fort like right here or something if we think that that's going to be a helpful thing. And so let's come back to the budget, and we see fort maintenance is down to only 1. You get a much cheaper maintenance specifically on the one in the capital, so this is one of the reasons why deleting the one in the capital is not something you want to do often. Next up, army maintenance. Regulars aren't even that good early on. And we don't need this big an army for basically anything we want to do. So we're going to detach the entirety of the, infantry. Infantry kind of are just bad early on. We don't really care that they're Mamluks and we get a bonus. Infantry is just kind of bad early on, and we are just going to disband them. All of them. We'll keep the 200, but even this is maybe gratuitous, and maybe we're supposed to delete down to 1 armored horseman. So that is that significantly decreased down to 1 ducat. We're still losing 9 ducats, and a big part of this is the Mamluk barracks. That's a big expense. We already showed this off a little bit with the granaries, but we don't need much manpower now anyway. We are going to shutter all of the Mamluk barracks. We're going to look and see if there is a location that we have with exactly 1 Mamluk barracks to keep open. But we are looking to close all of them if possible. We see that there's 1 Mamluk barracks there. It's unfortunately not in an area with really high control, but what we will do is we will open this one specifically, and we'll keep that open for a little bit of manpower to sustain these guys. That's maybe not the right decision. We're maybe supposed to close all of them and only have 1 unit anyways, because you do need the 1 unit for your ability to put someone in charge of the army. And so that is going to be our kind of what we do with the budget here, and the buildings. With the Mamluk barracks gone in terms of the maintenance, which it hasn't registered yet, we will get roughly another 24, so we should be positive 16 in balance. We're also just going to let this auto decide. We don't get anything from the tribes, so we won't tax them. We aren't getting much from the Dhimmi, so we'll just get rid of the tax on the Dhimmi. And everyone else who we're getting a decent amount on, we will look to just auto-tax them. The only one we're thinking about is the Ulama, where we will get, if they have a high satisfaction, additional research speed progress. This is pretty strong early on. Later on, we might want to tax them, but we'll actually slide this down, so we can expect to be making roughly 12 ducats a month before getting all of our trades in, which are going to give us more money. We'll unpause just to see a little bit of how this shakes out, but this is going to be how we handle the budget here. And just something worth doing is looking, if your building expense is really expensive, looking at it and trying to identify why it's expensive. For people with specialty buildings, closing those buildings can make sense. It can make sense to close cathedrals. Mamluk barracks specifically are just insanely expensive, and so for the Mamluks specifically, we want to go after that. But also deleting army and deleting forts is going to be good on virtually everyone at game start, because levies are where it's at anyways. We see that we don't have any minting available. I'm pretty sure that we will once the game unpauses. But I guess we'll keep it where it's at, but that is something you want to make sure that you are minting normally. Alright, we have a couple miscellaneous, top-level things. First of all is declaring rivals. I actually like the trend towards conciliatory, and so as a result, I don't like to put this in until we are resolving our first war, just to decrease the antagonism. And even then, sometimes just like to keep the trend towards conciliatory, so we're not going to be doing that. Getting married is fine. We don't have any diplomats left, though, so we can't do that. Doing stuff with your religion's also okay. Just taking a look here, do we like this guy? Not especially, so we're not going to invite him. But if we did have someone who we wanted to invite, we would. Monthly research progress is fine. Monthly war exhaustion, not too useful. And we kind of want a twofer, especially because it's going to increase expected cost of court. And this is effectively more expensive for us early on, so maybe even if it's someone juicy, we still don't want to invite them. We already talked about we aren't going to do the government reform until the next age. We can set down a law for slave conversion. This will cost us a little money, so you do want to do this before you have any type of spending. I don't think we want the rebel growth, and we're okay with the slaves. We don't want to force the slaves to promote, and so we're probably going to allow slave religion, but we don't necessarily have to do it immediately. We're going to do it though. The slaves output will be nice, and so that'll handle that. And research generally isn't too crazy, and usually it's informed if you have some sort of specialty geography that gives you different text to to research. This is going to inform your kind of research tree, and also your religion is going to inform your research. But generally speaking, going for institution growth early on and the guilds is usually good, and then it's going to be on to the next tree, and this is a strategy onto its own. And so we're just going to make sure that we're researching something. In particular, Tolerance of True Faith is good enough that I think we'll go for it for just the satisfaction. This will help our prosperity a little bit, and then we'll go for this, and then by then we can probably go for the institution growth. We will get institutions relatively quickly, so we do want to research this a little bit faster than most other people will be wanting to do. Alright, next up we have our spend down. Now we already put in a bunch of things for our input goods, but just kind of re-emphasizing a bit that we showed off with the markets before, we know that the price of fine cloth is going to get really, really expensive. It's already reasonably expensive, but there's a huge negative margin. There's also a big negative margin on jewelry. We know jewelry is going to go up, but we don't have necessarily super good places to produce jewelry, but we could still produce jewelry as well, just kind of looking at the demand that is currently in place. And so what we want to do is we don't want to overlap too much where we're producing stuff to produce other stuff, but these guys producing tools, let's actually change this up a little bit. Let's make it so that 2 tools are being produced here, because both of these are cities, and cities will get an additional construction capacity, so they can construct a lot of stuff, and they can construct a lot of stuff quickly. So a point we want to make is that, generally speaking, on most countries, getting roads relatively early on is going to be very, very nice. However good you think roads are, they're just going to be better. It's just by virtue of the rivers that we're not prioritizing this, but for most other starts, what we would be doing, and we'll just do it just to be instructive, is if we have urban areas connecting the roads, what this will do for most locations, or most of the time, is if you have the cost of proximity moving through, and the cost is plus 40, or is just the 40 base, and you're reducing it by 20 by virtue of building a road between the two, you will decrease very often the proximity cost by 10 plus, which will increase the control of that location downstream by 7. And so this means that if we have, looking at the control here, if we have 70 control, that will increase the value of all of these buildings by 10%. So looking at these buildings, there's 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. There's 16 buildings. And okay, not all of them are the most profitable buildings. Actually, there's 18 buildings that are, kind of city buildings. And then there's even some of these others as well. So let's call it 20 buildings. If the road is... if we're increasing this by 10%, then the road segment is effectively worth 2 buildings. And so even though roads look really expensive, this is 2 buildings for 60 ducats, effectively speaking, for most starts where you're going to actually get this huge proximity gain off of it. We're not going to, because we have this river, right, which is getting us the proximity reduction instead of getting a proximity cost of 30, or sorry, instead of a proximity cost of 40, we're only having a base proximity cost of 10, courtesy of the river. But for a lot of starts, what you want to do is you want to connect via roads your urban areas together. But also, not only would we increase the control here by 7, if our control is going through the same line, it doesn't here. But if our control is going from here to here, from this location to this location, we would also downstream, down road, increase the control of every location down that traces its path through the location we built the road, would also get an additional 7 control. So if this place has 20 buildings, this place has another 20 buildings, that's 40 buildings, and so it's effectively 4 buildings for the price of 60 ducats, right? But it traces its way a different way. Looking at this, we see that all the segments here are going to be downstream, and so we already have the reduction, but roads are a priority for other nations, specifically roads to urban areas that are nearby. We have an urban area all the way back here. That's a lot of road segments to build, and we have an urban area all the way back here, a lot of road segments. We're not even getting any proximity really down there anyways, I don't think. Taking a look at the proximity map mode, our proximity doesn't even extend that far. Eventually we'll want a road down there, but it's not as much a priority. But checking for roads is usually the first thing that we do, and even if we don't build them right away, because we're waiting for the price of sand to go down very often, this is going to be something that we want to be paying attention to. You can see here that the price on this is going to be affected by these input goods. Usually we wait for the price collapses. This is another point of emphasis. What we would be doing on most of the starts, or if we were actually playing the Mamluks, we would just probably build the masons and the lumber mills and wait for the prices of the stuff to go down because we're paying extra for these. But okay, check the roads, resolve the input goods, and then after that you look and see how much your bank is. We still have a very, very healthy bank, and so we're going to be wanting to build for profit. We know that it's going to be really, really profitable to build the tailors, and so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look here, and we see, hey, there's no cotton in here. Is there cotton in one of the other places where we have a city? Well, there's not cotton in there either. There's not cotton where we have cities. That is unfortunate. I was expecting that to not be the case and illustratively add the fine cloth specifically where we have cities, but fine cloth and I think jewelry in the capital are generally a good enough shout. And so what we'll do is we will add a couple of jewelers guilds and a couple of fine cloth in the city. I know what you might be thinking. Journalist, I thought you wanted to spread it out because of promotions. What's going on? What gives? Because you're not trying to be getting all your promotions in one place. Well, first of all, we actually have a bunch of available burgers on standby anyways, so these will be employed up. And second of all, pop promotion speed is throttled by control. And so if you have a city that's your capital and it has a ton of control, then usually you can overbuild there. So we will build quite a bit in the capital. Notice we are building to the point where we only have 40 available burgers, and then we are going to build one beyond that, because by the time all these buildings finish constructing, we might have that additional guy available. So we're going to do that, and then in Alexandria, we're going to take a quick look at what we have going on, and maybe we add another glass. This is probably okay. And then in here, we are looking at our input goods. Nothing too crazy, but something that you are going to end up building a lot of is just tools in general. And also, in general, you are going to be building quite a bit of paper. So we're actually going to add a couple tools. We're going to add one tool there. Actually, yeah, let's just add the one tool there. And then paper, we are also going to build here, because eventually we're going to want to build scriptoriums and paper. Actually, let's add the scriptoriums instead. No, we'll add those in the capital. They'll be a little bit more profitable in the capital and in Alexandria, so let's add them in the capital just a little bit. We are kind of now we're going to be throttled by our construction speed, actually. Let's build them in the capital instead. Okay, so we've built a bunch of buildings. We know we're going to be profitable. We're resolving our inputs. We know that trade's going to be relatively good for us, but before we do that, let's check our RGOs. RGOs will be profitable and should be what you look at first if you know your RGOs are insane, but our RGOs are not insane. Now, we would want to wait for our lumber to get collapsed first, but just to be instructive, the way we're looking at it is we're looking through the RGO builder. We're not looking through this menu here, because if we use this menu, we'll open up the stuff for the sugar, and then we'll okay, we build a sugar everywhere. Good job. This sugar is adding virtually nothing to the tax base. The location really matters in terms of how much control it has and how much market access. So we don't want to just add a ton of sugar right here, right? And a better UI for doing this is the RGO builder, because it's not that we're looking to build sugar specifically. We're looking for the most profitable things for us to build. And so what we'll do is everything that's over 1 ducat, we'll add that as well. RGOs are always profitable. Notably, per ducat, this is a lot less profitable than the buildings early on, and then it will be for us in this context specifically. Let's actually just build above these, because these are actually really expensive. We would wait for these to get to 33 ducat cost for the lumber price to come down, but we're not going to, just to kind of show what we would, just to kind of be instructive in terms of how we think of it in terms of process. And we have a little bit of money left over after kind of our spend, and in general, you do want to make use of your promotions. It's a little bit less important for us because we have so many pops and we have so many already qualified burgers and this type of thing. So realistically, we should just build in the 4 cities we have in our power base here, ignoring completely all these other cities. But for a lot of starts, like let's say you're playing as Poland, you have 1 city and 1 town, and you want to make use of the promotions because the promotions are a resource. And so what you do is, one of the most productive things you can build in towns that are far away from your capital, which is kind of what we have remaining, at least relative to what control we have at this current juncture, or proximity, one of the things you can do is marketplaces, which will often be very profitable early on, especially if you have really good RGOs. We don't, but they'll still be profitable. Marketplaces, these can be built it doesn't matter where they're built. In terms of, it matters what market they're built in, but it doesn't matter where they're built in terms of they will always give you the trade. And so this means these locations aren't going to be good because they good for most production buildings because they have poor market access and they have poor control. It doesn't matter for the marketplaces. Again, we would wait for the price of glass and masonry to get cheap, but building these on the peripheries is going to make quite a bit of sense here. And so we can also do that in markets where we're not as active, like here in Damascus, because generally speaking, even though we're focused on this market, this can be a lucrative opportunity for us. And that's most of our gold spent down. Having a small buffer is kind of okay, just in case you want to spend stuff a little bit differently. Again, though, what we would probably do is just spend the first couple hundred on these buildings to collapse the price and look to get the full discount on stuff, but we're not doing that here. We're just trying to illustrate how we approach it. We build the profitable stuff in our power base. We resolve our production issues close to the market center, and then we build the marketplaces kind of a little bit more towards the periphery. So generally speaking, at least at the outset, just letting the market trade for the most profitable thing is how we would approach it. But very early on, we would put in our own trades in a couple of different ways. So we'll just talk about that kind of briefly. We are going to assume that the institutions are going to spawn in Venice and Geneva, and wherever institutions spawn from, we want to establish a decent chunk of imports from these. And so what we would look for is where is there a really big market balance for Geneva and Venice. Generally speaking, if you don't have marble, you can import marble from either one of them, and it doesn't have to be the most profitable route. We are just looking to get a route in on these guys so that we can pull institutions. So let's say that Geneva specifically spawns the institution. We'll put in a trade for marble, and it won't be the biggest trade, but we'll put in one, and then we will also put one in. We know that, hey, we turned off our furniture stuff because we care about wood. So we're going to also put in an import for furniture because that will likely be profitable from Geneva. Looks like we get told no, we can't, so we won't. But that will probably be profitable because right now the furniture is only 3.34. It's going to go up in price, and so we could probably do that later. And another thing is, often you don't want to do this on too many runs, but you can import the input goods as well. And the reason you don't want to do it is because as we import, the burgers will just stop importing, and this will just kill the route. But we have some lumber coming in. We do want to collapse the price of this, and we also just kind of want to show that going for lumber is something you could do. One of the reasons you don't want to import it, though, is that if you are importing, the goods that you import are worse for collapsing the price than domestic goods, and so generally speaking, we would prefer to build the lumber mills ourselves to the extent that we could do this. But this is a play pattern that is going to be kind of present on the Mamluks sometimes, and so what we're going to do is we're going to look to import. Now, we want to bring additional goods into our market, so we can kind of approach this two ways, and we're going to just choose the most profitable route, Damascus, because we can use Damascus to feed wood into Alexandria right now, but eventually we will want to get prices low in Damascus, and so even if the route is not the most efficient, kind of saving Damascus's wood price is maybe something that's worth it for us, and so we'll import as well from the Trapezois market. We're not going to have anything too crazy in terms of what we want to do in this Damascus market. We're not as focused on it, but we are going to put in a couple of custom routes here in the Alexandria market. Let's actually decrease the size of this one. Let's just get a little bit, so the other ones will trade for profit, and this is a reasonably profitable route that is going to be, I think, net positive for us here, considering the base price is so low, or the current price is so low in Geneva. That's going to be nice for us, and then these will be helping to supply us with lumber in the Alexandria market, where it's not going to be bringing in a ton of lumber, but this combined with this should help us to get our price collapse that we are looking for. Alright, so a bit of a point of emphasis. I do think we definitely should have married our heir, and that's probably what we do the next time we get diplomats. And to be fair, we could recall some of these diplomats. We probably should have only improved relations with one of these guys, the one that we are looking to annex first, and then just married off a whole bunch instead. A little bit of a correction there. But with that said, we want to see what happens with the budget and what happens with the cores. We saved and reloaded already, so we saw that everything we did with crown power brought the crown power up from 16 to 25%, which is going to help the budget a lot, because now instead of, you know, like minus 20% tax efficiency, we are getting instead only minus 10% tax efficiency, which is very, very nice. But let's see what happens when we unpause. We also do have the minting to be concerned with, and take the first month, peel it off. We will get to see what our budget looks like, and also the creation of cores in the places where we accepted their culture. So all these places are cored. We are going to have basically zero control in a lot of these locations, but yeah, 0.03. But once we get rid of local courts, we will have 5 control in all these locations. And once we get rid of banal lordship, we will also have a good chunk in these locations. Also, right now, we have a huge, we have really disloyal peasant estate. And so this is driving the average satisfaction down quite a bit. And so we'll actually expect kind of low single digit control in this area even before we do those things. We see the minting has now appeared rather than being kind of weird, so we can up that, and our budget is looking like, hey, we're getting 69 ducats. That's pretty nice. A good amount of ducats, and just kind of a reminder, we killed like 40 worth of expenses, and so we can bring the military back, but the fact that we're earning like 5 to 6 times as much as we would if we didn't kill all these expenses is like a huge deal, and will be a huge deal for most starts to delete your forts. For us specifically, we also had buildings and also army that we had to address. A lot of starts won't have that, but they will have that. The other stuff, but the cores are also nice, and the crown power is relatively speaking addressed. Yeah. You can see just how big a difference that extra 75% makes, really kind of resolving the issue, which is also one of the reasons why we want to get the marriages going, because we want to make sure once our heir takes power that he also is going to have a bunch of kids, so that we can continue to use crown power characters to put in the cabinet, and ideally have better, more qualified crown power characters in the cabinet, leading the armies, these types of things, so that we could look to max out the potential crown power we can get off of these characters. We do notice a couple sneaky stockades actually here that maybe should have been deleted, but honestly, stockades we can't rebuild, and low-key like the stockades in these areas because we have like no pops here, not a lot of stuff here going on. It's not like we want to invest a lot of resources here. The stockades, I think, have less employment than the soldiers, and they are at the very least defending these entire provinces from being captured. They aren't going to give a zone of control, but leaving the stockades is actually something we consider sometimes because we cannot rebuild stockades, and so having these places just defending the province is and being relatively low maintenance is nice enough. So we're just going to leave those stockades. But that has been everything we do before unpause. The game feels ready for us to start as the Mamluks. We talked about some of the ideas we have going forward, specifically with the state privileges, this type of stuff, getting the very, very nice, what is it, this one into treasury rights in is going to be something we look to do pretty early, completely eliminating our tax efficiency malice, but that's what we have here. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the YouTube algorithm stuff. If you want to support the channel, a good way of doing it is using our code on official Paradox store if you are buying products at full price. This won't give you a discount, but it will send 12% of the sale our way, which is a very generous cut from Paradox. But other than all that, y'all have a good one. Bye-bye now.